Module 29, Followers of Wen Cheng Ming. I, Dr. Rita Pratap, former head of the Department, Drawing and Painting, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. I am going to speak on the followers of Wen Cheng Ming. Wen Cheng Ming was considered the most influential painter of his day. His noble character and wide circle of friends made him an inspiration to young gentlemen. His learning, range of styles, brilliance of his technical accomplishments made him an ideal teacher and interpreter of the literary tradition. Wen Chia, Wen Po Jen, Chao Chen, Tang Yin and Chiu Ying were ardent followers of Wen Cheng Ming. Besides the above artists, 20 of his descendants took to painting. Followers of Wen Cheng Ming. There happened to be many reasons why Wen Cheng Ming was considered the most influential painter of his day. His noble character and wide circle of friends made him an inspiration to young gentlemen. His learning, range of styles, brilliance of his technical accomplishments made him an ideal teacher and interpreter of the literary tradition. For a century or so after 1550, most Suzhou scholar painters, beginning with his son Wen Chia, who was active from 1501 to 1583, and his nephew Wen Po Jen, who was active from 1502 to 1580, were influenced by Wen Cheng Ming. Besides the above two, more than 20 of his descendants took to painting. Wen Chia's landscape in the spirit of verses by Tu Fu, dated 1576, album leaf, ink and light colors on paper, and in the collection of Palace Museum, Taichung, is a good example. Wen Po Jen was more gifted of the two, specialized in tall, narrow landscapes executed in gentle, lyrical manner. In a landscape dated 1561, he is shown seated in a pavilion gazing at a stream, his books upon the table beside him. The light feathery brushwork and fresh color show clearly the influence of his famous uncle. He sits in pavilion gazing at a stream, his books upon the table beside him. Wen Po Jen himself was a wild and quarrelsome character, heartily disliked in the Suzhou district. The fact that no trace of his ill nature appears in his paintings is an indication to the extent to which among the literati in general, expression of feeling was controlled by the discipline of style. Chao Chen, Tang Yin and Chiu Ying in the early 16th century, at a time when the professional and amateur branches to painting were moving in such divergent directions, a trio of highly gifted artists took a position between the two factions and set out to reconcile them. These three artists occupy a position in the mid-Ming painting, somewhere between the Qi school and the professionals on one hand and the Wu school scholar painters on the other. They are sometimes called as neo-academicians, and sometimes, because of their style, which were compounded from various sources, the aesthetics, because of the close personal association and similarities in their styles, these three are best treated together. Chao Chen. Chao Chen, active about 1500 to 1535, who was probably the oldest of them, is said to have been the teacher of both Tang Yin and Chiu Ying. He was born in Suzhou and learnt painting from master now forgotten and lived as professional painter. He received little notice from the critics who were prejudiced in favor of their own literary class. His connection with Tang Yin's probably brought him into contact with members of the circle of Wen Chen Ming, to which Tang Yin had easy access, and a definite literary flavor is to be felt in certain of his works. The chief source of his style, however, was the landscape of Li Tang, who had been strangely neglected since Shung dynasty. The literary painters professed an admiration for and dependence on the northern Shung and earlier masters, especially Tung Yuan and Chu Jian. The Qi school artists followed the southern Shung academy, especially the styles of Ma Yuan and He Sha Kui. It was logical, perhaps too much so to have entered their minds at all, that painters who attempted to bridge the gulf between these schools should turn to the transitional era of Shung painting, during which the northern Shung austerity had relaxed, but the apogee of the romantic day yet ahead, the era dominated by Li Tang. Chao Chen modelled his style on that of Li Tang. A typical example of the type is a carefully constructed hand scroll which shows a white robed scholar sitting under a tree beside a pool, dreaming of immortality in a thatched cottage, is a hand scroll in the Freer Gallery of Art. It bears an inscription signed Tang Yin, but there are sound reasons for doubting the authenticity of this inscription and attributing the painting instead of Chao Chen, with several of whose work it agrees closely in style. The affinity with the Li Tang manner are immediately apparent in the shapes of rocks and technique of depicting their surfaces in the pine trees in the composition. The other features were probably original with Chao Chen, although they appear also in the works of Tang Yin. For example, a fondness for a pronounced tonal contrast, especially on the rocks where they indicate strong but somewhat arbitrary lights and shadows. The drawing combines a consummate mastery of brush technique with a power of draftsmanship and freedom from mannerism seldom met within post-Shung painting. The subject has to do with a poem by Po Chui about a man who dreamed he had attained the state of immortality through Taoist practices. The scholar in Chao Chen's painting is seen through the open window of the mountain top cottage, asleep, leaning on his desk. Then, as the scroll is unrolled further, he appears again in his dream. Having sublimated his gross corporeal part, he is floating off to the land of immortals. One is transported magically from a sustained world, made convincingly by the strong modelling of rocks and superb renderings of details to a realm of space, an abyss ringed by dim peaks above which the tiny figure is suspended in mid-air. Rarely has the hand scroll form been so effectively employed. It is said about Tang Yin that when the demand for his pictures became greater than he could fulfill, sometimes asked Chow to paint them for him. His careful control brushwork can be found in numerous hand scrolls and hanging scrolls. On both silk, on paper, well composed and full of rich detail. He painted landscape, but if at all he did paint figures, they would illustrate edifying tales of the past, scenes from famous poem or members of his own class, but his interest in the lower classes, whether sympathetic or critical. An example is a hand scroll of beggars and street characters, dated to 1516. It is a section of a hand scroll, ink and light color on paper, belonging to Ming dynasty and at present in the Cleveland Museum of Art. This is one of the most touching and powerful works by this very important artist. A gaunt and demented looking woman with an infant at her shivered breast, a poor beggar in tatters leading a dog. Tang Yin. Among the Ming painters, Tang Yin, who was active from 1470 to 1523, was considered the most colorful personalities. Tang belonged to a humble family and his beginnings were brilliant, as he stood first in provincial examination, which marked him out for an official career. But while still in his 20s, he was involved in a scandal about cheating in a government examination and returned disgraced and penniless to his home in Suzhou. The humiliation hung over him for the rest of his relatively short life, but he never lost his old friends, among whom was the upright and disapproving Wen Cheng Ming. The door to an official career being closed to him, Tang Yin was forced to support his family by painting. This he did with such notable success that he had, it is said, to ask his friend and neighbor Chow Chen to help him fulfill the commissions by painting pictures for him to sign, a fact that probably accounts for the comparatively few surviving pictures bearing the signatures of Chow Chen. Artistically, Li Tang stands in between that some of his works are in a thoroughly scholarly style and taste. Others follow the more professional Li Tang derived manner of Chow Chen. Tang Yin's small picture hanging scroll, Palace Museum collection, Taichung, titled Clearing After Snow in a Mountain Pass, is patterned upon another Li Tang painting type. The monumental landscape, the season is early winter, probably just after the first snowfall, as leaves can still be seen on the trees. The time early evening, as heavily laden ox carts approach the end of the day's journey, a village in the pass. Another section of a hand scroll titled Secluded Fisherman on an autumn river. Ink and colors on silk, Palace Museum collection, Taichung. In a poetic passage towards the center of the composition, two scholar fishermen relax in their boats, one trailing his foot in the water and playing a flute, the other keeping time by clapping. Fallen red leaves drift on the waves and lie scattered on the rocks. The harmony of colors is lovely and reveals a different attitude. Washes of blue, green and red brown tones help to give substance to the rocks. Its texture is conveyed by short strokes in ink derived from Li Tang's axe cut tusun and applied like lees with a partially dry squeezed brush. Tissot P. Ming critique speaks of Tang Yu's brushwork as more refined than that of Li Tang. Another characteristic work by Tang Yin is a big hanging scroll titled Strolling Across a Summer Stream. It is in the Royal Ontario Museum, Toronto. Its scraggy mountains and monumental design were inspired by the great masters of the early northern Shung dynasty. The precise drawing of trees and close textured rocks were derived from Li Tang by the way of Chao Chen, and the decorative color also recalls the academic tradition. But the subject, a scholar in a landscape, belongs to the literary world on the edge of which Tang Yin moved. Painted perhaps as a concession to popular taste on satin, this charming picture shows with what refinement and skill he could fuse together elements of diverse origin. Murmuring pines in a mountain path, National Palace Museum, Taipei. A monumental landscape format presents a summary and luxuriant scene with a marked counterpoint between the rich and soft textures of the foliage and the more austere and angular faces of rock and mountains. Tang Yin was also an expert painter of flowers, of beautiful women and of figures in garden setting. His landscapes and figure studies are up to date copied and imitated by a host of anonymous professionals up to recent times. Thus, most of Tang Yin's painting, like those of the Shung masters, are on silk, the characteristic medium of the conservative northern painters. The scholarly painters of the southern school tended to work on paper. He was a master of wide repertory, both monochrome and polychrome landscapes in the one corner style by him have been preserved, as well as genre painting, including erotic scenes in glowing colors and figure scenes illustrating historical events, flower pictures and architecture paintings. He moved the people into middle ground again. The landscape served as a staffage for him. In his picture in the flower painting category, which make up the smallest part of his work, he created a synthesis of monochrome and polychrome painting, although he was not considered one of the real leaders in innovation. An example is of a chrysanthemum and bamboo, ink and light color on gold paper, fan leaf, and at present in the SMBPK Museum, Berlin. To what extent the chrysanthemum and bamboo of the fan leaf could be regarded as symbolic of Tang Yin's way of life is purely speculative. Possibly in the bamboo an embodiment of the ideal of noble, and in chrysanthemum a symbol for the secluded life of the poet Tao Yuan Ming. He saw a metaphor for his failure as a noble-minded official. In this picture, the characteristic style of calligraphy is noticeable in writing near the bamboo, just as it strikes one that blooms are filled in with color inside an outline. But the chrysanthemum leaves were done without drawing an outline. Strong contrasts are produced by the shape of the dark bamboo, the climbing blossoms, and the soft silhouettes of further bamboo shoots. His model for calligraphy was Chao Meng Fu. In painting, he followed the contemporaries of Ming Chao Chen from Su Chao and Li Tang from Shung period. Chiu Ying, who was active about 1510 to 1551, student of Chao Chen, was a very popular painter of his time. He earned his living as an illustrator and lacquer artist as well as painter of commissions, was equally popular to pictures based in some way on Tang and Shung paintings. He is belied by an endless series of album leaves and scrolls representing aristocratic ladies in bright colors playing in park or puttering in houses pretty. Golden Valley Garden is a hanging scroll, ink on color on silk, belonging to Ming dynasty and in the Museum of Kyoto. Is one of pair of garden views which shows his conservative style at its height. Its subject is party in the famously lavish garden of 3rd century merchant prince Shi Chong. Figured awnings cover the wall and beneath them the host stands to receive his guests, surrounded by peacocks and peonies, symbol of wealth. Antique bronzes, rare fantastic rocks, ornamental trees and shrubs, and numerous servants. Chiu's painting, regardless of size, can be characterized as the works of great miniaturists, in which smallest brush sensitively used creates exquisitely refined detail. His scenes of women quarters in the palace, for example, are in the long tradition extending back by way of Qian Hussein and Chao Wen Chu to the Tang masters Cheng Hussein and Chao Feng. Perhaps the finest of his few surviving works in this genre is the long hand scroll Spring Morning in the Han Palace. It is a section of a hand scroll, ink and color on silk, and at present in the National Palace Museum, Taipei. In the scroll, a court painter is engaged in portraying an empress or imperial concubine. In the portion reproduced here, while her maids cluster around them like brightly colored birds, and 2 palace enchus stand guard outside. This is just the kind of painting for which Chiu was best known. In the standard biographical sketch of him says, Chiu's paintings were beautiful and elegant, full of delicate and graceful detail. The brushwork was so refined that the pictures looked as though they had been carved in jade. He was particularly skilled in painting gentlemen and ladies who looked as if alive. Chiu Ying's study of Shung ceramics and ancient bronzes enabled him to include extremely accurate depiction of these objects in his painting. Chiu Ying was also noted for archaic gold and blue-green landscape, ostensibly based on Tang masters, but actually more dependent on Chin Hussein's transformation of this manner. Excellent examples to be seen in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston and Nelson Gallery, Kansas City. From a set of 4 seasons, 3 huge figure compositions survive. The summer scene, passing a summer day beneath banana palms, preserved in the Palace Museum collection. This painting portrays 2 scholars sitting on the ground in the shade of a banana palm and tall rocks escaping the heat. One plucks a kind of banjo, the other listens. A servant boy prepares flowers in a bronze vase nearby, signed as playfully drawn by Chiu Ying. His pictures, like Tang Yin, were widely copied, with the result that there are far more good forgeries than originals in existence. Lady in Pavilion overlooking a lake, dated to 1522. It is a hanging scroll, ink and color on paper, belongs to Ming Dynasty and at present in the Museum of Fine Art, Boston. In the painting, a lady is shown in summer pavilion set among a grove of trees beside a large lake on river. Here, Ying rivals the scholar painter at his best in its pure and serene air and in the distended view of mountains and spits of land. The style of Ni Tisan is apparent, but in the exquisitely fine detail of the scholar's table and female attendants, we see the delicate miniature that is most characteristic of his style. His architecture is accurate and believable. The implements on the table of the scholar's study are correct in drawing, and the tree and foliage have spontaneity of brushwork. Chiu Ying's lovely scroll of narcissus and flowering apricots in the Freer Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. was painted in 1547 in the precise style known as Kung Pi Hua. In its perfect craftsmanship, delicacy of touch and quietness of mood, the scroll recalls the ideal of flower painting as practiced at the Northern Shung Academy under the Emperor Hui Tusung. That it has been greatly admired can be seen from the number of seals it bears, which include those of the great Ming collector Hsiang Yuan Pin, and most numerous and conspicuous those of the Qing dynasty Emperor Qian Lung, who reigned from 1736 to 1796. Evening Visit in the Bamboo Courtyard by Chiu Ying and Inscription Poem of Wang Chong, 1494 to 1533. Ink and color on gold paper in the summer of 1635 and at present in the SMBPK Museum, Berlin, is also measured by his imitations of Tang and Shung paintings, which some cases have survived only through his works, as well as by his portraits depictions of historical figures, genre scenes and landscapes. He enriched his landscape painting by a combination of monochrome ink paintings in the blue and green style. He thus united academy and scholar styles on one scroll or on one leaf. Chew's executed his work finally with precise detail, and his vivid and light colors were carefully graded. Almost without exception, his landscapes include figures, making the transition between the landscape and historical painting smooth flowing. Thus, many of Chew's painting, regardless of size, can be characterized as the work of great miniaturist, in which the smallest brush sensitively used creates exquisitely refined detail. To conclude, it is not wrong to say that the stylistic variety within the paintings of these artists mirrors the whole multi-layered society of Su Chow. To infuse new life into the old, conservative styles and techniques was not at this late date an easy task. Chow Chen, Tang Yin and Chin Ying were perhaps the last artists to accomplish it with complete success. All these may be credited also with stimulating a new interest in pictorial content, narrative and descriptive, and thus helping to counteract the severe limitations of themes which threatened to impoverish the literary school. Most important of all, three brilliant artists demonstrated once more a truth that was constantly being doubted and denied in the later centuries in China, that technical skill is no way incompatible with genius, nor is dullness the inevitable outcome of careful craftsmanship.